It was just a coat. That's what Daniel said when I asked him where it had gone. It was just a coat, Mom. I remember the words because they landed harder than they should have. He said them from the kitchen casually while eating leftover lasagna, like nothing had changed. But it wasn't just a coat. It was the one your father wore every winter for the last 20 years of his life. Brown wool patchy at the elbows, faint smell of cedar from the closet sachets I always refreshed in December. It was hanging where it always had until it wasn't. I found it of all places stuffed in a black donation bag by the garage door. Crumpled, dismissed, forgotten. When I pulled it out, the wool was cold. I clutched it like a child, fingers trembling as I reached inside the lining pocket, the one no one ever used, except him. I felt the paper before I saw it. Thin, folded, familiar. My knees buckled. I sat down right there on the concrete floor, coat in my lap, and I wept like I hadn't since the day we lowered him into the ground. Not just because he was gone, but because even now, even from beyond, he knew. He knew something. Something he hadn't told me until this very moment. Let me know where you're listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this story speaks to you, share your thoughts below. Don't skip, because what happens at the end will surprise you more than the betrayal itself. Daniel didn't notice I'd found the coat. He didn't notice much anymore. He moved through the house like a guest in a hotel, picking through drawers, muttering about things we should clean out or let go of. I didn't argue. I hadn't in months. He came home after the funeral and never left. Said it was temporary, just until he figured out what to do next. But somehow, my kitchen became his office. My husband's chair, his favorite reading spot, became Daniel's dumping ground for unopened mail and Amazon boxes. His silence grew roots in the walls. He didn't ask how I was, not once. I held the coat tight that night, long after he went to bed. In the quiet, I unfolded the letter. My husband's handwriting was there, the same angled slant, the way he looped his G's like musical notes. If you're reading this, it began, then I've already gone. And if you're holding this coat, then you found what I couldn't say out loud. My throat closed. The page shook in my hands. I read every word twice, and then again. He had known. He'd seen the change in Daniel too. I'm sorry for what he's become, the letter said. I wanted to believe he'd find his way, but you and I both know. Some things don't grow back once they've gone rotten. There were account numbers. A name I didn't recognize, a man from his army days. He said someone he trusted to hold the funds outside the family. In case Daniel tries to take it all, he wrote, this money is yours. Only yours. He signed it, and underneath, he'd written a sentence that broke me more than anything else. I should have protected you better. This is the best I can do now. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my husband's chair, the coat still wrapped around me like a second skin. I didn't cry again. Not after that. There was no room for tears, only silence. Daniel had taken so much. My time, my peace, my memories. But he hadn't taken this. Not the letter, not the account, not the truth. I realized as the sun rose and spilled gold light across the kitchen tiles that my husband had left me one final thing, a choice. Not a weapon, not a command, just a quiet trust in my hands. I made coffee at 6:12 a.m. Daniel still wasn't up. I placed the letter inside a book, tucked it between old recipes I knew he'd never touch. I placed the coat back in my closet, pressed and folded behind my winter scarves. That morning, when Daniel finally wandered in and poured himself coffee without a word, I didn't say a thing. I just watched him. Watched the way he looked around, like he already owned everything. Like I didn't matter anymore. But I mattered. I mattered enough for my husband to hide something where only I would think to look. I mattered enough for a plan. So I stayed quiet, smiled when Daniel made jokes about me needing to declutter my life, nodded when he mentioned the house being too much for one woman. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I didn't even flinch when he asked if I'd ever thought of selling. Because now, I had something he didn't. I had the coat, I had the letter, and I had time. Before all of this, before the betrayal, before the coat, before the silence, there was just us. Me and Henry, and later, me and Henry and Daniel. We were a family like any other, I suppose. Not perfect, but there was a kind of rhythm to our life, like a song we all knew by heart. I met Henry when I was 22. I'd just started working at the library downtown, fresh out of college, full of plans that didn't quite matter once I saw him. He came in asking for a book on classic car restoration. I gave him the wrong Dewey number twice because his eyes made me forget how to think. He wasn't loud, not like the other men I'd dated. He was careful. Still. Like he noticed things most people missed. By our third date, he brought me a rose wrapped in newspaper and told me he liked how I said the word catalog. I married him the following year. We didn't have much at first. Rented a tiny brick house with a kitchen barely big enough for one of us. Henry worked construction jobs. I taught reading classes at the library and sold baked goods at the church market on weekends. I remember once we only had $20 to our name and a busted radiator. He made dinner out of rice-canned beans and a single onion. We ate it by candlelight like it was filet mignon. We laughed that whole night. I think that was the first time I really understood what it meant to feel safe, not because we had everything, but because we had each other. Daniel came 6 years later. I was 30 and terrified. Henry built the crib himself, painted it blue and carved tiny stars into the headboard. The day we brought Daniel home, Henry cried. Just once. Quietly, while I pretended not to see. He held that baby like something sacred, and for years, that's what we were, a sacred little thing, the three of us. Summers at Lake Wallenpaupack, Henry grilling burgers in his sleeveless t-shirt, Daniel splashing in the shallows with a yellow bucket. Winters were softer, fires in the hearth. Henry's old records playing Sinatra, sometimes Elvis, while I knitted, and Daniel built towers out of blocks. I remember thinking often how lucky I was, not in the flashy way people brag about, but in the quiet sense. Henry worked hard. He never complained about the late hours or the injuries. Even when he lost 2 fingers in that saw accident, he came home, kissed me on the forehead, and said, "Guess I'll finally have an excuse not to play piano." He was that kind of man. Steady. Funny in a quiet way. But Daniel was always different. Sweet, yes. Beautiful eyes and this shy little laugh when he was small. But even then, he was separate. He didn't run to Henry when he got scraped knees. He came to me. He didn't ask to play ball in the yard. He preferred puzzles books, computer games. Henry tried. Lord, he tried. Built a treehouse for Daniel's 7th birthday, climbed up with him, brought sandwiches, even read Harry Potter aloud, just to bond. But Daniel never connected to him the way I did. And it hurt Henry. I saw it in his eyes, even when he never said a word. As Daniel got older, it got worse. Teenage years hit like a thunderclap. Doors slammed. Words flew like knives. "You're a construction worker," Daniel once snapped at Henry. What do you know about college applications? I'd never seen Henry shrink like that. I remember the way he quietly set his tools down, left the room, and sat in the garage for 3 hours. I didn't know what to say to either of them. We made it through somehow. Daniel got into Penn State, barely came home after that. The calls came less and less. Texts replaced conversations, and when he did visit, he brought his ambition with him. Suits, business talk, friends who called me ma'am and barely looked me in the eye. Henry. He just stayed in the background, watched, took care of the yard, made sure everything still worked. Then came the coughing, the weight loss, the night sweats. Henry tried to downplay it, but I knew. The doctor said it was pancreatic cancer, stage 4. We didn't tell Daniel right away. He was busy, Henry said. Had a big interview. It wasn't until 3 weeks before Henry passed that Daniel finally came home. He walked through the front door with a Bluetooth earpiece in and asked me if we had Wi-Fi. I showed him to his old room, now a dusty guest space. He didn't say a word about Henry's condition. Not one. That night after dinner, Henry tried to talk to him. I remember listening from the hallway. "You doing okay, son?" Henry asked. Just that. Daniel sighed. Said, "Look, I don't really know how to do this. Okay, I'm not good with death talk." Then he left to take a phone call. Henry sat in that chair, his old one in the den, and stared at the fireplace without speaking for the rest of the night. I cleaned the dishes, held back tears, pretended I didn't hear any of it. Henry passed 2 weeks later. Peacefully in the hospice bed we set up in the living room. I held his hand until the end. Daniel wasn't even in the house when it happened. He'd gone out for coffee, came back just as I was covering Henry's face with the sheet. I'll never forget what he said when he walked in and saw me crying. "You want me to call the funeral home like we were rescheduling a dentist appointment." I don't think I've ever hated anyone in my life. Not even now. But in that moment, I felt something dark bloom in my chest. Something cold. It wasn't just grief. It was the death of something deeper, the dream that Daniel would someday come around. That he'd love Henry like I did. That he'd remember how we once were. That dream died the same day Henry did. The change didn't come like a thunderstorm. It didn't announce itself with lightning or screaming matches. It came quiet, like rot, like mold growing in the seams of an old house you've lived in too long to see clearly. After Henry died, I expected sadness. I expected silence. I expected long nights staring at our empty bed, reaching instinctively for the shape of him. What I didn't expect was Daniel. Not the son I raised, not the boy who used to fall asleep on my chest in the rocking chair. This version of him was colder, calculating, and I didn't see it all at once, not until that first fracture. It was 5 days after the funeral. Daniel stood in the kitchen, holding a manila folder. His voice was calm, casual. "We should look at consolidating the accounts," he said, like we were reviewing a budget together. "I mean, obviously Dad didn't have a will, so technically it all defaults to you. But I could help with the paperwork." I was holding a tea towel. I remember that clearly because I gripped it so tight my knuckles turned white. "There is a will," I told him. "It's in the safe. Has been for years." He blinked. "Just once." "Oh, well, good. Then we'll take it to probate. No hug, no emotion, just business." The will was simple. Henry left everything to me. The house, the savings, the pension. Daniel's name didn't appear once. Not because Henry didn't love him, though, by the end I wonder, but because Henry trusted me to decide. We talked about it. Long before the cancer. He'd said he's smart. He'll land on his feet. But if something happens to me, I want you taken care of. And that's what the will reflected. Clean. Straightforward. No room for confusion. But Daniel didn't like that. He pretended he did. But something flickered in his eyes when I showed him the document. A pause. A stiffening. "Well," he said, setting the will down slowly, maybe it's time to talk about long-term options. For you. I know the house has a lot of upkeep. Would you really want to be alone here forever?" I didn't respond. because I knew what he meant. He wanted the house, wanted to sell it, wanted the money. That was the first fracture. The first time I looked at my own son and saw a stranger staring back. He started staying longer, said it was just until things were settled. At first, I let it happen. I cooked for him, washed the dishes he left in the sink, picked up the trail of discarded shoes, coffee mugs, laptop cords. I watched him walk through this house like it already belonged to him. He started suggesting changes, new furniture, getting rid of old junk. He brought home a woman, Melissa, who had long nails and a voice like static. She barely looked at me when she walked in the door. "Your mom's cute," she told Daniel once loud enough for me to hear. Like Hallmark movie cute. I stayed silent. I smiled. I made them dinner. Because I was watching now. Every word, every move. Then came the second fracture, the bank visit. I went in to move some money from our joint account. Just enough to pay off the property taxes. The teller, sweet girl named Erica, looked confused. "It says here," she said, tapping the screen, "there was a transfer last week. Significant one." I leaned closer. A $9,800 withdrawal. Online. I hadn't touched the account. "You sure that was me?" I asked. She frowned. "It was a linked device, yes. Same IP as your home address." I came home that afternoon shaking. Asked Daniel if he knew anything about it. His face didn't even twitch. "Oh yeah," he said, not even looking up from his laptop. "I moved some stuff around. Just figured it'd be easier if I handled it. Less stress on you. Less stress. Like removing money behind my back was some kind of gift." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just nodded and went into the bedroom. Closed the door, sat on the floor for a full hour, and didn't move. That's when the silence began. The third fracture came with the coat, but not the pocket. Not yet. That came later. The fracture was in the way he looked at me when I asked if he'd seen it. "That old thing," he laughed. "I put it in the donation pile." "You're not actually keeping that, are you?" And he walked away. Just like that. Tossed 20 years of memories into a black trash bag and didn't even blink. It wasn't just a coat. It was the one Henry wore to every winter fair. The one he wrapped around my shoulders when the wind came in hard off the lake. The one he wore the night we danced on the back porch while snow fell in lazy spirals, and Daniel, he'd thrown it away like garbage. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I waited until he left for dinner with Melissa. Then I went to the garage, found the bag, pulled it out, brushed off the lint, and then my fingers found the pocket, the soft slip of paper, the weight of something I didn't know I needed. That was the final fracture. The moment it stopped being grief and became something else, something darker. Not hatred, not exactly, but the knowledge that this boy, this man I raised, had chosen himself over everything else. Over family, over decency, over love. And that meant I had a choice now too. I didn't sleep that night. Again. I sat in the den, letter folded in my lap, the coat draped over the chair beside me. I stared at the wall and thought about every birthday party, every scraped knee, every moment I'd whispered, "I love you," to a child who would one day look at me like I was standing in the way of his inheritance. And I made a promise. Not out loud, not in words, but deep in the marrow of my bones. I would not let him take anything else. Not the house, not my peace, not the last thing Henry left behind. I stopped speaking the day after I found the letter. Not entirely. I still said good morning when Daniel came down the stairs, and I still asked if he wanted tea when I made mine. But the real words, the ones that would have cracked me wide open, they stayed locked behind my teeth. There's a power in silence people underestimate. It makes them nervous, makes them fill the space with their own guilt. Daniel didn't notice at first. He just thought I was tired. Said things like, "You should get out more," or "You're always just here." He didn't get it. He never really did. I moved the letter to a safer place. Inside the pages of my old cookbooks behind a recipe for Hungarian goulash, no one's asked me to make in years. I memorized every word. I didn't need to look at it again to feel it burning behind my ribs. Henry had written it clearly, the account, the name of the man who held it, and the simple line that made everything else fall away. "If anything happens to me, this is yours alone. Do not tell Daniel." My husband had known. Maybe not the exact details, but the truth of it. That Daniel wasn't coming home to grieve. He was circling like a vulture. I called the man listed in the letter 2 days later. His name was Richard Caldwell, Henry's old army buddy. When he picked up, I only had to say I'm Henry's wife before his voice softened. "I was waiting for this call," he said. We spoke for 10 minutes. He confirmed the account, confirmed my access, confirmed that Henry had set the whole thing up years ago. There was more money than I expected. Much more. Quietly accumulated. Untouched. He didn't want it touched until he was gone, Richard said. Said it was for you to decide what happens next. I thanked him, hung up, sat with the dial tone humming in my ear like a hymn. From that moment on, every word Daniel said sounded like noise. He started suggesting we meet with a realtor. Said the market was strong, that we could cash out while we're ahead. I asked him what he meant by we. He smiled, that smile I used to think was charming when he was little. "I mean, obviously it's your house, Mom. But you're not planning on staying here, right? It's too much for one person." That word again. One person. Like I'd been reduced to a square foot measurement. I nodded, told him I'd think about it. Then I made my own appointments. I called my lawyer, rewrote my will, transferred the bulk of Henry's hidden account into a trust under my name only, bought a burner phone, called an old friend from high school who now worked in elder estate protections, had everything notarized and filed without a single ripple in the water. All while Daniel thought I was watching reruns of Murder, She Wrote. It was easy in a way I didn't want to admit. Easy to protect myself. Easy to set up barriers, because I'd spent a lifetime putting Daniel first. And now I finally understood he wouldn't have done the same for me. He was already shopping for condos in the city. Showed me a photo of one on his phone while I was trying to water the succulents Henry used to keep on the windowsill. "This place has great light," he said, tapping the screen. "If we sold the house, I could actually afford it." Think about it, Mom. You could have a cute little place near the lake, maybe a condo with no stairs. Wouldn't that be better? Better than what I wanted to ask. Better than this home where my marriage lived. Better than the walls Henry painted with his own hands. Better than the porch where we carved pumpkins every October. But I didn't ask. I just smiled and said, "It's a nice place." Then I went into the bathroom and turned the faucet on so he wouldn't hear me breathing like I'd been punched in the stomach. The coat stayed in the bedroom closet now, folded, preserved. I couldn't look at it too often. It made my chest ache. Not from pain, but from resolve. That coat and what it carried had changed everything. Gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost. The right to choose. The strength to act. Melissa came around more often. Left her curling iron plugged in. Used my bath towels. Once I found her wearing one of my cardigans and calling it vintage. Daniel said I was imagining things. That I needed to relax. That I was acting like a hoarder. I said nothing, just moved my important things to a locked chest under the bed. Melissa never asked me for anything directly, but I saw the way she looked at the house. Like it was a stage. like she was already planning where to put her throw pillows. One night they went out to dinner and forgot to take the wine bottle off the counter. I poured myself a glass and sat by the fire. I stared at the flames and thought about every dinner Henry and I had shared here. I could still hear his voice in the cracks of the floorboards. I could still feel his hand on mine when the room got too quiet. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'm going to make it right. Not for vengeance, not even for justice, but for the woman Henry believed I was, the woman he'd trusted with his last secret." That night before bed, Daniel knocked on my door. "Hey," he said, leaning on the frame like he didn't already live rent-free under my roof. "You've been kind of distant. Everything okay?" I met his eyes and nodded. "I'm just tired," I said softly. He gave me a long look, like he was trying to decide whether I was still useful. Then he smiled and said, "Well, don't worry. I'll take care of everything soon. You won't have to stress about any of it." And for the first time since the funeral, I almost laughed, because the truth was, I'd already taken care of everything. I waited until Daniel left for a weekend business trip with Melissa to open the code again. The house was quiet, still. It always was when he wasn't here, like it exhaled in his absence. I pulled the coat from the closet like a sacred relic, careful not to wrinkle it. I laid it on the bed, smoothed the sleeves, then slid my hand back into the inside pocket. My fingers met the familiar fold of paper, but this time, something else, deeper in the seam near the bottom, a rougher texture. I pinched it, gently tugged, and felt stitches strain. My breath caught. I reached for the seam ripper from my old sewing kit in the drawer. Carefully, delicately, I cut through the lining. Inside was another envelope thicker, unmarked. When I opened it, the first thing I saw was a photograph. It was of me, from years ago. I was sitting on the back porch, laughing at something Henry had said. The sun was low golden. My hair was still dark back then. Behind me, just barely visible through the window, was Daniel, maybe 9 or 10, watching, not smiling, just watching. The back of the photo had writing, just one line, "Always protect her, even from him." My stomach clenched. Beneath the photo was another note. Not handwritten, typed. Precise. It was a statement of transfer. The hidden account wasn't just a savings account. It was an offshore trust. One Henry had opened under a third-party holding company years ago. The kind of thing you only do when you don't want anyone, not even your son, knowing it exists. My name was already listed as primary beneficiary. No probate, no court. All it took was a signature and a code phrase. I read the last page and saw it written there, typed clean and bold, code word Marigold. My breath hitched. Marigold was the name of the cat we lost when Daniel was 5. Henry had planted marigolds in the garden every spring since. I thought it was sentiment. I never knew it was a cipher. I stood there, coat still, spread on the bed, the letter trembling in my hands, and I whispered it aloud. Marigold. The word didn't bring tears. It brought steel. Henry hadn't just hidden money. He'd hidden trust, plans, proof that even in his quiet way he saw what was happening. Saw Daniel for what he'd become. Maybe not all at once, but enough. Enough to plan. Enough to protect me in the way he never could face to face. And now, everything was in place. He'd passed the torch, and he trusted I'd carry it to the end. That evening, I took the coat to the dry cleaners. Not because it needed cleaning, but because I wanted it to be preserved, sealed even. Like a chapter closed. I told the woman behind the counter it had belonged to my husband. She smiled gently. "It's a beautiful piece," she said. I nodded and left it in her hands, knowing I might never wear it again. But I no longer needed to. The coat had done its work. Over the next few days, I made moves. Quietly, methodically. I withdrew a fraction of the trust, just enough to pay off the house, settle the taxes, and create a small cushion in a new account under a new LLC. I named it Marigold & Co. for my own amusement. I transferred the deed of the house into the trust's ownership. Legally, Daniel would never be able to touch it. Ever. Not with a gun, a lawyer, or a sob story. I also changed the locks. Not the obvious ones, just the side door, the basement entry, and the attic crawl space. Little things he wouldn't notice, not right away. I even moved the safe to a new location inside the crawl space behind the insulation panel Henry had once used to hide Christmas gifts. If Daniel ever went snooping, he'd find the old safe empty, exactly as I wanted. Because now, the truth was hidden, where only I could reach it. Melissa returned first. Alone. Said Daniel was staying another day to close a deal. She walked around the house in my slippers, helped herself to the wine, asked if I'd had a chance to reconsider the condo idea. I told her no, smiled the whole time. When she went upstairs for a nap, I watched her heels clomp on my wood floors and imagined how many lies she and my son had traded like poker chips. But I didn't feel rage anymore. I felt clean, detached, focused. Revenge wasn't fire. It was ice. Daniel returned Sunday night. His face had that too polished look, groomed, composed, but a little too tight at the jaw. He kissed me on the cheek like nothing had changed. Told me about the amazing opportunity he was investing in. Just need to liquidate some things, he said, eyes flicking toward the hallway where the old safe used to sit. I figured we could revisit the house sale this week. Might be good timing. I looked at him across the table. Saw the boy I raised, and the man he'd chosen to become. You know, I said softly, I used to think silence was just part of getting old. But lately, I've realized it's a choice. He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I sipped my tea. It means I'm done pretending. He stared at me, searching for some angle, some opening, but there was nothing left for him to see. Not anymore. That night, I went into my bedroom and opened my journal. I wrote one sentence. The pocket wasn't empty. Neither am I. It didn't happen all at once, Daniel's unraveling. It came in small pieces. Like the way he started checking the mail, more often fingers twitching every time he held an envelope that looked official. Or the way he stood in front of the fireplace one night, just staring at it as if he was calculating something. I let him walk the halls like a king in a crumbling castle. Let him measure the drapes and make little comments about resale value and market trends. It was almost entertaining watching him plan a future I'd already erased. Melissa began spending the night more often. Claimed it was because she was helping with the transition to what I never asked. She used my perfume once. I noticed it missing from the tray on my dresser. She smiled when I asked if she'd seen it. Oh, I thought it was an air freshener, she said with a giggle. I looked at her long and quiet. It was a wedding gift, I told her. From my husband. 40 years ago? She blinked. Oh. Right, sorry. But she wasn't. I didn't care. Not really. Because by then, I'd already frozen the funds. The real ones. The trust was locked behind multiple authorizations, all verified with a private notary Daniel would never find. The LLC I'd created now owned not just the deed to the house, but the vehicles, the stocks, the remaining bonds. Every traceable asset Henry and I had built was now out of reach. Daniel still thought he was circling a wounded deer. What he didn't know was that the deer had grown fangs. He started talking about helping with the bills. Asked me if I had a copy of Henry's pension statements. I handed him a blank envelope and told him the paperwork had been sent directly to my lawyer. That's not how it usually works, he said, frowning. Maybe not for you, I answered, and went back to watering the houseplants. I'd moved Henry's records to a fireproof box in the attic, one Melissa would never climb into, and Daniel didn't even know existed. and I'd put a little note inside it, handwritten, dated, and notarized. If you're reading this without my consent, you're already too late. By the third week, Daniel was pacing the hallway at night. I could hear the soft thud of his socks brushing against the hardwood. At breakfast, he looked more distracted. Said things like, "I might be stretched a little thin this month." That was when I realized he'd already borrowed against the future. My future. Probably expecting to replace it with the proceeds from the house sale. Probably thought I'd cave. That I'd fold like I always used to, the way mothers do when their sons pout long enough. But I wasn't folding. I was watching. Then came the realtor. She showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. Smiling, clipboard in hand, blonde hair in a neat twist. Daniel said this was a good time, she chirped. I brought some comp listings and a sample valuation. I offered her tea, sat her down in the sunroom. Daniel wasn't home yet. "May I ask what kind of timeline you're thinking of?" she asked. "I'm not," I replied. She blinked. "Oh, I thought this was a shared decision." I leaned in softly but firm. "Let me explain something. Daniel is not on the deed. He is not the executor of the estate. He does not have power of attorney. And he does not speak for me in this house. Do you understand?" Her face turned red. She glanced at her clipboard, then at me, and gave a small, stiff nod. "Understood." I let her finish her tea before she left. And I gave her one last gift before she walked out the door. "You might want to choose your clients more carefully," I said. "Some of them build futures on land they don't own." She said nothing. Just stepped into her car and drove away, tires silent on the gravel. That evening, Daniel stormed in. Slammed the front door. "What did you say to her?" he snapped. I turned from the sink. "She stopped by unannounced," I said. I told her the truth. "You embarrassed me," he hissed. "In front of a professional." "No," I said, setting the dish towel down. "You embarrassed yourself. In front of your mother." He stared at me, jaw tight, eyes twitching. I saw it then, the panic. It wasn't about the house anymore. It was about what he'd already spent, what he'd promised. And now, the floor beneath his feet was starting to crack. 2 days later, I found a letter from a credit lender addressed to him. He'd used my return address. Bold of him? It was unopened, sitting in the recycling. I took it into the laundry room and read it slowly. He was past due. By months, and the balance wasn't small. I folded it carefully and placed it on his pillow. That night, he didn't come down for dinner. Melissa left the next morning. No goodbyes. Just a slammed car door and silence. Daniel didn't speak for hours. I saw him standing in the yard at sunset, staring out at the road, arms crossed. He looked small, shrunken, and for a flicker of a moment I felt that old ache. The one that used to make me forgive too quickly. But I didn't move. He came back in after dark. Didn't say a word. I heard him in the kitchen opening the fridge. Heard the clink of a beer bottle. Then footsteps down the hall. A few minutes later, I walked past his room. The door was slightly ajar. I glanced in. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding the credit letter in both hands, his head bowed. The bottle sat unopened beside him. For once, I saw the boy, not the man. The boy who used to cry when his Lego castles collapsed. The boy who begged me not to send him to sleepovers. The boy who once whispered, "Don't ever die, okay?" But it was too late. That boy was gone, replaced by this man who had tried to devour everything left of the life I built. And now that man was crumbling. He knocked on my door just after midnight. I was still awake. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night since Henry died. I sat in my armchair with a book open on my lap, glasses still on, though I wasn't reading. When I heard the knock, I didn't answer right away. I stared at the door at the thin shadow beneath it, and I waited. Another soft knock. Then his voice. Quiet. Not demanding like usual, not clipped with frustration or entitlement. Just small. Mom, he said. Can I come in? I waited a second longer, then said, It's open. The door creaked, and there he was, my son, but not the one who'd been living here the last few months. Not the one with realtors and spreadsheets and investment jargon. This one looked like he hadn't slept either. Eyes red, shoulders low. No Melissa. No swagger. He didn't come all the way in at first, just stood there. Then finally he crossed the room and sat on the footstool in front of me like he used to when he was little and needed help with a scraped knee. I know I've been a lot lately, he said. I said nothing. Let the silence fill the room. He looked down at his hands. I wasn't always like this, he said. I mean, I wasn't supposed to be. Still, I said nothing. He ran his hand through his hair, exhaled hard. I messed up. I really messed up. I could feel it then. The shame, thick around him like smoke. He finally looked up at me. I took some risks, made some deals. I thought I could flip it all quick, come out ahead, set us both up. I swear I thought it'd work. I wasn't trying to. He stopped. The words stuck. Good. Let them stick. He swallowed hard. I thought if I could sell the house, we'd both be better off. I didn't know about the trust. Or the whatever it is you did. He gave a little laugh, dry and empty. Honestly, I don't even know how you pulled it off. I let my eyes meet his. Steady. I wanted him to see the woman behind them. Not the grieving mother. Not the fragile widow. The woman Henry knew I could be. The one who'd survived long before Daniel ever opened his mouth about ROI or asset value. That's the problem, I said softly. You didn't think you needed to know. You just assumed. His eyes dropped again. I know, he said. I know. I didn't treat you right. I treated you like a step I had to manage, like an obstacle. I closed the book and set it aside. You treated me like a delay, I said. Like something inconvenient between you and what you thought was yours. And you treated your father like he was already dead long before he ever left this house. His head dropped into his hands. I watched his shoulders shake once, maybe twice. No tears fell. Not yet, but the cracking had started. He whispered something into his palms. I almost didn't hear it. I was angry at him, he said. For not being more, for not understanding me. He looked up, eyes raw. I never said it, but I think I hated him sometimes. And now he's gone, and I can't fix it. And you still looked at me like I was your son, even when I didn't deserve it. I didn't speak right away. I let him sit in that weight. Let the regret soak into the carpet beneath his feet. Then I said, You're right. You didn't deserve it. He winced. But I gave it anyway, because I'm your mother. And maybe that's the flaw in the design. We keep giving even when the well is dry. He started crying then. Quiet, shaking sobs bent forward like the shame was pulling him in half. I didn't move to comfort him. I couldn't. Not yet. I needed him to feel it, to carry the sting of it. Finally, he looked up. I'm sorry, he said. I'm really, really sorry. I don't want your money. I don't want the house. I want to be your son again. My chest ached, not with forgiveness, not yet, but with the long, aching memory of love, the kind of love that built tree houses and wrapped coats around small shoulders and sat through the flu with a bowl of cool water and a towel. The kind that kept going even when it got nothing in return. I looked him straight in the eye and asked, Why now? He swallowed. Because I don't have anywhere else to go. And I don't mean just physically. I mean, I've burned through every bridge, every favor. Melissa's gone. My partners are threatening legal action. And you're the last person I thought would still even look at me. I nodded slowly. And if I hadn't found that letter in your father's coat pocket, if I'd handed you everything like you wanted, would we be here right now? He shook his head. Honest? No, probably not. That was something. I stood up, walked past him to the window, and stared out into the night. The moon was high. The porch light glowed faintly against the grass. I remembered standing there with Henry once barefoot in the cold, talking about whether we'd ever retire. I'll build you a sunroom, he'd said. You'll never have to leave. I remembered how warm his hand felt in mine. I can't promise you forgiveness, I said, without turning around. And I can't promise we'll go back to anything that felt like before. Because before's gone. Your father's gone. And you, Daniel, you broke something in here. I tapped my chest gently, and broken things don't always heal clean. He stood, his voice barely above a whisper. What do I do now? I turned and looked him full in the face. You don't do anything, not for a while. You sit with it, you carry it. You live in the silence you made for yourself, and you don't ask me to make you feel better? He nodded. Once, like a child, and then without asking, he walked over, knelt by the chair, and rested his head against the armrest. I let him stay there, but I didn't touch him. The morning after he broke down in my room, Daniel didn't come out of his bedroom until nearly noon. I was already on my second cup of coffee, curled up in the sunroom, with the local paper and a cinnamon roll I had no appetite for. The sky was gray, not storming. Just undecided. That strange kind of light that makes everything feel suspended in time. When I heard his door open, I didn't turn around. He moved slower now. No loud footfalls or fake confidence. Just soft, almost cautious movement. He stopped in the kitchen, poured himself coffee, and stood there with the mug for 10 minutes without drinking. Then he came into the sunroom. Morning, he said quietly. I nodded. He didn't try to sit, just stood there waiting. I finally looked up. You have a long road ahead, I said. I know, and I don't owe you anything. I know that too. We didn't speak after that for several hours. Not out of anger. It was just still, like we were both learning how to breathe in this new air. He spent the afternoon in the garage reorganizing Henry's tools, lining up screwdrivers, and polishing the workbench like it was sacred. I watched from the window. His posture was different. His movement slower, like someone returning to a place they used to live, but couldn't quite fit inside anymore. 2 days later, I invited the pastor from our church over. Not because I'd suddenly found religion, but because Henry had trusted this man, and I needed someone else in the room, someone who wouldn't flinch. Daniel sat in the living room with his hands clasped. He didn't fidget, didn't argue, just listened. The pastor spoke softly about repentance, about action, not apology. He looked at Daniel and said, Sometimes the only way to be forgiven is to keep showing up, every single day, even when no one claps for you. Daniel nodded, didn't speak. That was the first time I believed maybe something had landed in him that would stay. Over the next week, I made my boundaries clear. I gave Daniel a list of rules. He would not access my accounts. He would not invite guests. He would not comment on what I owned or how I spent my money. He could stay until the end of the month. After that, he'd need to find a new place. I'd pay his first month's rent once, and then he was on his own. He said nothing for a moment after I told him, just sat with it. Then he looked me in the eyes and said, That's more than I deserve. And he was right. What surprised me most wasn't how easily he accepted it. It was how quietly I felt afterward. I thought setting that line in stone would hurt, that it would make me feel cruel. But it didn't. It felt like closure. The kind of closure that doesn't come from apologies or hugs or grand gestures. The kind that comes from naming the hurt and deciding you're done letting it grow. I mailed Melissa's things back to her without a return address. Daniel never asked me to. I just did it. A week later, a single envelope arrived addressed to him. Handwritten, from her. I watched him open it on the porch, standing in the cold, in just a t-shirt, reading line after line without blinking. Then he folded it, tore it once, and dropped it into the recycling bin. I didn't ask what it said. He didn't offer. I found myself doing strange things in the quiet that followed. Reorganizing the spice rack. Dusting the baseboards. Watering plants that were long since fake. I even washed Henry's coat again. Not because it needed it, but because it made me feel connected. I hung it in a garment bag in the hallway closet and labeled the hanger with a small yellow tag, Keep. Not because I needed to tell anyone, just to remind myself. The final shift came on a Sunday morning. Daniel knocked on the door to the sunroom again. This time he had something in his hand, a small photo frame. Found it behind the tool chest, he said. He handed it to me carefully. It was a picture of Henry and me on the front lawn. I had a book in my lap. Henry was holding a lemonade, both of us smiling, with the kind of ease you don't notice until it's long gone. I remember this day, I said. Daniel nodded. I don't, he replied, but his voice didn't carry judgment. Just distance. Honest distance. I set the frame on the side table. I'll make breakfast, he offered. Nothing fancy, just eggs and toast. I nodded. Let him. It was the first time he'd cooked in my kitchen without trying to impress or manipulate. He didn't ask where the pans were. Didn't comment on how old the stove was. Just moved like someone trying to make peace with the room. We ate in silence. But it wasn't tense. It was steady, measured. I watched him from across the table. He didn't look like a stranger anymore. He didn't look like my little boy either. He looked like someone walking the long road back to humanity. Someone with blistered feet and empty hands. But still walking. After breakfast, I walked him out to the porch. The air was brisk. I had my sweater wrapped tight. He stood on the step, hands in his pockets. Thanks, he said softly. For breakfast, I asked. For letting me start over. I nodded. This is your start. What happens next is yours to carry. He looked down. I'll try. You'll do, I corrected. Trying isn't enough anymore. He blinked, accepted the words. Then he stepped off the porch and walked down the path toward the sidewalk. He wasn't leaving yet, but I needed him to practice, to see what it felt like to walk away and not be chased. I stood there long after he disappeared down the block. The wind tugged at my sleeves. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I looked at the garden beds near the porch. The marigolds were starting to bloom again, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt ready. I sold the house 3 weeks later, not out of spite, not as a final jab or act of revenge. I sold it because I didn't need it anymore. The rooms that once held laughter and routine had gone quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, echoed with memories that no longer brought warmth, just reminders. I'd lived in that house for 42 years. I'd painted those walls with Henry, cleaned apple juice off the floor when Daniel was small. I had scrubbed grief into the tile grout after the funeral. But homes aren't forever, and I had other places to be. I didn't tell Daniel until the paperwork was done. He had already found a 1-bedroom in a modest building near the old hardware store where Henry used to buy nails in bulk. He said he liked the quiet, Said it smelled like effort. I didn't ask what that meant, but I liked how he said it. I called him on a Thursday, told him I'd sold the house and would be moving into a small cottage by the coast. He went quiet. Not the kind of silence that holds judgment or protest. Just breath. Then he said, "Good. You deserve that." I said I do. The trust Henry's account covered the purchase outright. The cottage sat on a bluff overlooking the bay, 2 bedrooms, wide porch, sun-faded shutters. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, and it didn't carry ghosts. I signed the papers under the name of the trust's LLC Marigold & Co., just like I'd planned. It made me smile. Felt like Henry was in the ink somehow. I moved with only what mattered. The coat. The picture of us on the front lawn. The wedding ring I still wore on a chain around my neck. I left behind the things that had become weight. Boxes full of linens and unread books. Cookware I'd held onto out of obligation. Melissa's lingering perfume on the guest towels. All of it stayed in the past, just where it belonged. The first morning in the cottage, I stood barefoot on the porch with coffee and watched the ocean breathe. It was early. Mist hung low over the water, and gulls circled the rocks below. I thought about Henry, about how he'd once promised me a sunroom. This wasn't that, but it was light and it was warm and it was mine. That was enough. Daniel visited once about a month later, called ahead, asked permission, brought a pie store-bought, but he cut off the label. We sat on the porch. He noticed the coat now displayed in a glass front shadow box in the hallway. He really loved that thing, he said. He did, I replied. Then he looked at me and asked the first real question he'd ever asked in years. Did he know I didn't pretend not to understand? I said yes. He nodded, stared out at the water. I don't know how to live with that, he whispered. You don't, I said. You just carry it, and if you carry it long enough it gets lighter, but it never goes away. He left before dinner, didn't ask to stay, just hugged me gently and said he'd call next week. And he did, not every week, but often enough. The calls were short, sometimes awkward, but they were his way of standing in the wreckage he'd caused without turning away. I respected that. The money stayed untouched for a while. The trust sat quiet in the background of my life, like an old friend keeping watch. Eventually, I used part of it to travel. Scotland, first Henry always wanted to go. I scattered a few of his ashes in a loch, watched them vanish beneath the surface like they belonged there. I sent Daniel a postcard. Didn't expect a reply. Didn't need one. I joined a writing group. Nothing formal. Just other women like me, middle-aged, carrying stories in their bones. We met at a small bookshop every Thursday and wrote about things we'd never said aloud before. The first time I read aloud from my pages, I said Henry's name. Said Daniel's too. There were no gasps, no pity, just nods, because most of them had stories like mine, different details, same ache. And then one summer afternoon, I got a letter, handwritten, no return address. But I knew the handwriting, Daniel's. Inside was a short note, just 1 page. Mom, I've paid off the debt, found a job I actually like. Small firm. They don't care where I used to be, just what I do now. I think about Dad a lot, about what I took and what I can never get back. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying, really trying. Every day, I miss you. Daniel. I folded it and placed it inside the same folder that held Henry's letter. The pocket of truth, I called it now. And I cried. Not from grief, but from the kind of quiet you only earn when you've made it through the fire and realized you didn't burn. A week later, I called Daniel. We talked about nothing and everything. I told him about a bird that had nested near my porch. He told me he'd learned how to make risotto. We laughed. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. That night, I walked the shoreline barefoot, Henry's coat draped over my shoulders. It was cool, and the wind caught the edges of the fabric, like it remembered how he used to hold it closed around me. I stood there for a long while, not waiting, just remembering. I whispered, "We made it," and I believed it. The letter Daniel sent stayed in the folder for months. I'd pull it out every now and then, read the careful strokes of his pen, and feel that strange mixture again. Grief and growth wrapped so tightly together, I couldn't separate them anymore. He'd tried. That was what mattered. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely, and I could live with that. I could live with a version of my son who no longer lied to himself about who he'd been. But then came the second letter. No envelope this time. Just a piece of paper slid under the cottage gate. It had rained the night before, so the ink was blurred like it had cried all the way down the path. The handwriting was shaky. Not Daniel's, someone else's. It was a note scrawled fast. "Your son owes, and we don't like being ignored. You can't hide him forever." I stood there in my robe paper, in one hand, mug in the other, heart thudding like a fist against my ribs. I read the words twice, 3 times. Then I walked back inside, locked the door behind me, and closed every curtain in the house. The quiet that followed was different than the one Henry had left behind. This one had teeth. I stared at the note under a lamp, tracing the pressure points where the writer had pressed the pen hard. The threats weren't new, I'd lived through worse. But the lie in Daniel's letter? That part stung. I waited an hour. Then I called him. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom," he said, and something in his tone made my jaw tighten. Too bright, too quick. I didn't say hello, just read the note aloud, word for word. Silence, then a faint curse. "I thought I handled it," he said. Apparently I didn't. Apparently I replied. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't say that yet," I cut in. "Say it when you've cleaned this up." "I will." "I'm not kidding, Daniel. I know." His voice had dropped. "I'll fix it." I hung up. Not because I was angry, but because I had nothing else to say until he proved he still deserved a voice in my life. I slid the note into the folder with the others, then pulled out Henry's letter. His last words still burned clean. "I should have protected you better." I smiled, bitter but steady. "You did," I whispered. "But I still have to finish it." I contacted my lawyer the next morning. Asked her to increase the security on the trust. She advised setting a protection clause on the cottage itself, no liens, no external access unless I approved it in writing and in person. I agreed. Then I filed a quiet police report. Nothing official yet, just in case. 3 days passed. No sign of Daniel. No call, no update. But then on the 4th day, he showed up. Alone. No car. Walked the 2 miles up the hill to the cottage, hair damp from mist, face pale. I watched him from the porch as he approached. He didn't wave, just kept walking until he reached the steps. "May I come in?" he asked. I nodded once. He stepped inside, took off his shoes without being told, and stood in the entryway like he didn't know what to do with his hands. They were people I owed from before, he said. Investors. Not official, just people who wanted returns. People who send threats, I added. Yes. He sat down on the edge of the sofa. I didn't lie in the letter. I meant it. I really thought I was out of it. But one of them found my new address. I don't know how they found you. They found me because you didn't change your habits, I said. You just changed locations. He didn't argue. You're right. That was new. I paid them today, he said. Everything I had left. I emptied my account, sold the car, pawned my watch, the one Henry gave you. Yeah. I looked at him for a long time, not with pity, not with rage, just with memory, of a boy who used to cry at thunderstorms and ask me if the moon ever fell, of a teenager who stopped coming home, of a man who almost broke me, and now this. Whatever this was. You didn't come here for comfort, I said. No, he replied. I came here because I needed you to see I'm not hiding anymore. Do you still owe anyone, I asked? No. And if they come again, they won't. But if they do, I'll handle it, not you. I nodded, stood, walked into the kitchen, pulled 2 glasses down from the shelf. You want wine or water? He smiled faintly. Water. I poured it, set the glass in front of him, sat down across from him. He didn't reach for it right away, just stared at the condensation forming on the sides. I loved him, he said suddenly. I didn't say it. I didn't show it. But I did. I still do. I don't expect you to forgive me for all of it, but I want you to know whatever I do next, it's not for redemption. It's because I finally understand. I leaned forward. Understand what that love doesn't survive in silence? And that trust, when it dies, it takes everything with it. I swallowed hard. He drank the water. Set the glass down. I won't ask you for anything else, he said. But if you ever need help with anything, groceries, moving boxes, whatever you call me. I watched him stand. Pull on his coat. Where are you going? I asked. Back down the hill, he said. I have to start clean, not here. Somewhere else. Take the bus, I said. No need to walk it again. He smiled small and grateful. Thanks, Mom. He walked to the door, paused, then looked back. For what it's worth. I still have the photo of you and Dad on the lawn. I keep it near my bed. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The door closed behind him. I stayed seated, listening. He didn't knock again. And this time, I didn't cry. I didn't open the library door for nearly 2 years after Henry died. It wasn't locked exactly, just untouched. Closed. Quiet. It was the one room in the house I couldn't bring myself to disturb. Henry's things had always lived in there, his old war medals, the book collection he alphabetized every spring, the worn leather armchair that had molded to his shape over time. I kept the key in my jewelry box tucked behind a faded brooch no one had ever asked about. But that morning after Daniel left for good, I stood at the threshold with the key in my palm and felt something shift. Not grief, not fear, something else. I unlocked the door. The scent hit me, first paper wood, and a faint trace of Henry's cologne, the kind he always dabbed on before we went out to dinner. I stepped inside. The room hadn't changed, not a speck of dust out of place. Everything sat exactly where he'd left it. His desk was clear except for an old fountain pen, a coaster with a water ring, and one thick book left open face down. The kind of pause that looked like he'd be back in a minute. But he wouldn't. I ran my fingers along the spines of the books. History, biographies, some mysteries. One shelf held nothing but books on carpentry and design. That was Henry. Always reading about building things, even in his last months when his hands shook too much to hold a drill. In the corner was the cabinet, locked as always. I crouched down and checked behind the lower shelf for the key. It was still taped there, just like I remembered. Henry used to call it his war chest, though I always assumed it was just old receipts and paperwork. The lock clicked. Inside on the top shelf was a small box, navy blue, velvet-lined. I opened it slowly and found a USB drive tucked inside. Nothing else. No note, no label. Just a flash drive with a small silver marigold charm attached. I stared at it for a long time before sliding it into my pocket. I spent the rest of the day in that room, rearranging, dusting, breathing in the space like I hadn't let myself in years. I cleaned the windows, wiped down the baseboards, even replaced the light bulb in the reading lamp. It wasn't an exorcism. It wasn't even closure. It was reclamation. This was mine now, my space, my memories, my version of him. That night, I plugged the USB into my laptop. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a single file loaded. If you're hearing this, I'm already gone. I froze. It was Henry's voice. My hand covered my mouth as the recording played. He sounded tired, but clear, still strong in that quiet, measured way of his. I wanted to say this out loud just once, he said. Not because I think you need it, but because I do. If you're hearing this, then everything I worried about probably came true. Daniel lost his way, and I wasn't strong enough to stop it. Maybe I should have done more. Maybe I should have said more when I saw him slipping. But I was afraid of what it might break. In him, in us, in you. I blinked, tears gathering at the edges of my eyes. I watched you hold us together, he said. Year after year. I saw you carry the weight of all our mistakes and never once ask for credit. And I know I didn't say this enough, but I saw it all. Every sacrifice, every long night, every time you let me rest when I didn't deserve it. You loved us both, even when we didn't give you much to love. I pressed my hand to my heart. There's money set aside, he continued. You know that by now, and I hope you've used it. Not to run, but to reclaim. I don't care if you build a new house or buy a boat or travel the world, just don't let him take what you've earned. Not even in guilt, especially not in guilt. He paused. I could hear him exhale. If Daniel comes back, let him work for your forgiveness. Let him dig for it. Don't give it to him like a blanket. Make him find it like a seed buried, waiting, needing care. And if he can't, then you move on. No shame in that. Another pause. I love you. More than I knew how to say out loud. I'm sorry I left you to face this alone. But you were always the stronger one. You always were. The recording ended. I sat there for a long time, laptop screen glowing in the dark, the marigold charm cold between my fingers. The house didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt seen, named, like everything Henry couldn't say in life had finally arrived in those few minutes. I didn't cry. Not like before. This wasn't collapse. It was release. I burned the note those men left me, not out of fear, but because it no longer held power. Daniel had done what he said he would. He'd taken the hit, paid the price, left with nothing but the hope that someday I might answer his call. And maybe I would, not because I owed him, but because he finally understood the cost of forgetting who you come from. I started to live again, slowly, carefully, not like a fire bursting to life, but like coals stirring back to warmth after the flames had long burned out. The cottage by the coast became my quiet sanctuary. I kept the days simple, mornings with black coffee and the gulls, afternoons tending the tiny garden I built with my own hands, 3 raised beds, marigolds in the corners always. Evenings wrapped in a quilt with old jazz humming through a speaker Henry once fixed with fishing wire and patience. I didn't talk about Daniel much. Not to the women I met at the writing group, or to the neighbors who sometimes stopped to admire the flowers. It wasn't secrecy. It was protection. Some stories just need time to unfold before they can be shared. But I wrote. Pages and pages, notebooks full of memory and silence of pain that turned slowly into something softer. I wrote letters I'd never send. I wrote apologies I didn't owe. I wrote about Henry. It was through the writing group that I met Arthur. A quiet man older than me by a handful of winters with a voice like smooth gravel and a limp from a hiking accident that had never fully healed. He wrote poems, most of them about his late daughter, her laughter, her freckles, her favorite type of clouds. He wasn't trying to charm anyone. That's what I liked. He just showed up every Thursday with a new page, a new cup of black tea, and eyes that saw the world like it was something you had to earn the right to describe. We started talking outside of the meetings. Long walks near the tide. He'd talk about his daughter. I'd talk about Henry. Sometimes we'd just listen to the sea, not trying to fix each other, just witnessing. One evening, I showed him the coat. I opened the garment bag, let him run his fingers over the soft wool. He didn't ask questions, just nodded, like he could feel the weight of it. That coat's held a lifetime, he said, and it still looks strong. It is? I replied, because the man who wore it made sure it would outlast him. Later that night, I stood by the window and watched the moon cast light across the water. I realized I didn't miss the house anymore. Not the old one, not the shadows in the hallway, not the closet where I used to store all my grief. What I missed was the sound of Henry's breathing beside me, the casual, unthinking comfort of being known. But missing didn't hurt like it used to. It was just a presence, like a thread that still reached across time. Daniel wrote again. This time a postcard, a photo of a quiet little diner somewhere in Idaho. Started over, he wrote. No credit cards, no fake promises. Just me in the morning shift flipping eggs and wiping tables. I think Dad would have liked this place. I tell people I learned to cook from my mother. Which is true, even if I didn't pay attention back then. I smiled when I read it, folded it into the same folder where all the other pieces lived. The coat letter, the USB transcript, the photos, even the burned edges of that old threat note. I called it the pocket now. Not literally, but in my mind. Because everything I truly needed had come from there, hadn't it? A hidden place sewn into the fabric of something everyone else had discarded. Forgiveness isn't soft. People think it is. They think it's this warm, gooey thing that spills out once you're done being angry. But it's not. Forgiveness is hard. Sharp. It requires strength and boundaries and a willingness to look at someone and say, I remember everything. And I'm still choosing not to let it define me. I never told Daniel he was forgiven. Not in those words. But I started answering his postcards, short replies, careful language, updates on the garden, a recipe here and there, not a bridge, but a path. A path he'd have to walk with patience and honesty if he wanted it to lead anywhere close to me. Arthur and I kept meeting. We never called it dating. We didn't need to. We were two people who had carried great losses and chose not to let them rot us from the inside. Sometimes that's all love is, recognizing another survivor and offering them a chair beside the fire. One rainy afternoon, I invited him over for soup. He brought fresh bread. We didn't talk about Henry. We didn't talk about his daughter. We talked about the sea, about how the waves always come back, even when they look like they're leaving for good. Before he left, he asked if I'd ever thought about publishing my writing. I laughed. Who'd want to read about all this, everyone, he said. Because it's real. And people need real more than ever. I started thinking about it, about telling the story not for sympathy, but for someone out there who might be clutching an old coat, thinking the past has nothing left to offer. I imagined her some woman somewhere standing in a garage or attic or basement, holding a memory so tightly she could barely breathe. I wanted her to know it mattered, that the truth, no matter how buried, never dies. It just waits to be found. And when it is, everything changes. I took the coat out one last time in early spring. The day was crisp, the kind that tricks you into thinking winter's still holding on, even though the earth is already starting to soften. I didn't wear it. I laid it out on the bed, buttoned it carefully, smoothed the shoulders. It looked the same as the day I found it in that black donation bag, same weight, same smell of cedar and thyme. But I was different now. The woman holding it wasn't the same one who'd broken down on the cold concrete floor, letter in hand, world falling apart. That woman had been grieving. This one was free. I placed the coat into a cedar-lined box I'd ordered custom, simple, polished, with a brass plaque on the inside of the lid. The engraving read, "Always protect her even from him." That single line had echoed through everything, through Henry's silent preparations, through the hidden account, the folded letter, the unspoken warnings, through the confrontation, the fallout, the rebuilding. And now, as I closed the lid gently, it echoed one last time. It wasn't just about Daniel. It never had been. It was about what it meant to protect yourself when no one else could. What it meant to reclaim peace without demanding someone else give it to you. Henry couldn't stop what happened after he was gone, but he'd left a seed, a truth buried deep in wool and memory, and I'd grown something from it. That afternoon, I took a walk along the beach. The tide was low, the wind kind. I walked slowly, the way Henry always did when he wanted to clear his head. Arthur had shown up earlier with lemon scones and a book of Rilke poems. He kissed me on the cheek, then left me to my ritual. He understood some days you just need to be with the silence that made you whole again. At the far end of the beach, I reached the driftwood stump where I'd once scattered the last of Henry's ashes. I sat there, coat still on my arm, and whispered into the wind, "It's done." Not with anger, not with grief, just certainty. When I got back to the cottage, there was a package on the porch. No return address. Inside was a photo. It was of Daniel. He was behind a diner counter wearing a white apron, hair pushed back. Smiling, not for the camera, but at someone just out of frame. His shoulders were squared, his face open. And behind him on a shelf was that photo of me and Henry on the lawn. Propped up like a lighthouse. No note, just the image. I pinned it to the corkboard in the hallway. No pride, no triumph, just acknowledgement. He was still walking, still trying. That's all I'd ever asked. In the weeks that followed, I submitted a few of my stories to a small publisher Arthur had recommended. They called it raw and quietly devastating. I laughed. Quiet devastation seemed to be my specialty. They wanted to publish one piece in particular, the one about the coat. I gave them permission on one condition: they had to keep the title exactly as I wrote it. After my husband died, my son threw away his coat, but he never checked the inside pocket. They agreed. It went out in a collection of essays that spring. Nothing flashy. Just paperback, small circulation. But people read it. Letters came. Emails. Women from across the country wrote to me about their own betrayals, their own redemptions, their own pocketed truths. One line came up over and over again. That first sentence. The one that cracked the dam. "It was just a coat, Mom." But it never was. It was love. It was legacy. It was a warning, a map, a gift. And it was mine. On the day the publisher mailed me the final proof, I poured 2 glasses of wine, one for me, one for Henry, and stood on the porch with the sun low behind the pines. I kept every promise I whispered. The wind lifted. A marigold petal fluttered from the planter box and landed near my foot. I smiled. Then I went inside and closed the door.